Hi, I'm Dawn Lester, co-author of the book What Really Makes You Ill: Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease is Wrong. During the research for our book, it soon became clear that the medical establishment has a poor understanding not only of human health, but also of animal health. Although animals are different from humans in many ways, they are nevertheless exposed to virtually the same factors that adversely affect human health, but none of those factors involves what are referred to as germs, whether viruses, bacteria, fungi, or even parasites. This clearly applies to the animals we welcome into our homes as pets, especially cats and dogs, and will inevitably lead people to raise the question, what does affect the health of our pets? So I'm delighted to welcome Nora Lenz to discuss this topic with me today. Nora Lenz began in the mid-1980s learning about human nutrition and its undeniable connection to health, and shortly thereafter began applying what she'd learned to the care of dogs and cats. Her book, called Rotational Monofeeding, is based on the diets of wild dogs combined with the universal principles of natural hygiene, the science of health. It seeks to give dog owners the tools they need to remove the causes of disease, which not only prevents disease, but typically reverses it as well. The book is the culmination of 30 years of research, experience, observation, intuition, and experimentation. Nora resides in the northwestern United States with her dog Calico and cat Sylvester. So welcome, Nora, and thank you for joining me to discuss this very important topic in the light of what we have been experiencing during the past 2.5, well, nearly 3 years, which is all based on the false idea that germs cause people to become ill. But this false idea also has implications for animals and their health, as I'm sure we will discuss in our conversation today. So, first of all, would you like to tell us a little of your story about your realization that health, whether of humans or animals, had nothing to do with killing germs, please?
Well, thank you, Dawn. I am so happy and delighted to be here and that our paths finally crossed, because this discussion needs to be had from the perspective of not buying into the nonsense that's coming out of the medical and the veterinary industry, which is all founded on this boogeyman theory, this germ theory. Anyway, to answer your question, a little bit of background. Well, your bio that you read there pretty much covers it. I started experimenting with home feeding my animals about 25 years ago, when I just got fed up with the veterinary approach to trying to keep them well. My dogs and cats just never got well. They died young. They were miserable. They were fat. They just had awful lives. And I knew when I started discovering health for myself that I could apply those same principles. It's like a light bulb went off in my head. And I knew that the same things that I was learning about how to take care of my own body applied to them too. And that if I created all those conditions, I'd have healthy animals. And that's the way it's worked out. And it works out that way for pretty much everybody who does the same things. And it's not hard to figure out. I'm just a regular lay person, right? This stuff is supposed to be so complicated that nobody can figure this out that hasn't been to school for 8 years, right? I went to school, but I took one science class, and it was symbolic logic. I'm not a scientist. You don't need to be a scientist. You don't need any specialized knowledge in order to know how to feed a dog. So we can talk about that a lot if you want to. But so I'll just answer your questions as you fire them at me. I'm happy to do that.
Yes, I mean, you say you haven't got sort of science background, but I think the logic is a very key part. Again, that was our approach, to look at what we were told through the research and then say that doesn't quite make sense. And the other thing obviously is, does it work? And it's quite clear that it doesn't work for humans, because despite the absolutely immense pharmaceutical industry, people are not healthier. I mean, if their model worked, we should all be very much more healthy than we are. So it clearly
Yeah,
doesn't. And the same applies
right.
to animals. Now, as I said, animals are different in certain ways, and certainly with respect to what they eat and their physiology and anatomy.
Yep.
But in general, they have a lot of similarities. They can be poisoned by things that are not supposed to be in their bodies, to put it bluntly. So that's pretty much how we are with humans, with the so-called healthcare system. So how was it that you started your process of trying the different foods? I mean, when was it that you realized that it was the food and not the veterinary practices? I mean, you were saying about going to school. I mean, vets go to they're sort of vet school, but they learn pretty much the same model that the medical establishment are based on, which is like you say, the germ theory.
Yeah.
So did well, you say you started with human health and then you applied that to your dog. So was it just a practice of trial and error with the animals? How did you approach it? I mean, I think you said you looked at nature. So
Yes. Not really initial, wasn't really trial and error. Initially, it was looking at nature. It was looking at the way dogs still live and eat out in the wild to this day. We don't have any natural humans that we can follow, that we can model ourselves after. We have to pretty much surmise that, our bodies were built in a certain way that involves the acquisition of certain foods, and we have to be able to do that only with our bodies, not with anything else. And anything that we do that does require something else to be acquired is not food for us. Well, dogs are the same way. We can look at wild dogs. If field studies weren't important, then scientists wouldn't be still doing them, and they are doing them. And I can't do that in my personal life, but I really don't have any desire to. I'd rather just read what they have to say about it and model what I feed my dogs after what wild dogs still eat to this day. And what we find when we look at in nature is that they eat primarily the bodies of vegetation eating and plant eating animals. And when they can't get prey, they eat vegetation, mostly fruit. They are attracted to fruit. Fruit is a natural secondary food for dogs, not vegetables so much, but fruit. So the differences that we see when we look out and see what wolves are eating, and between that and what we have access to here in civilized circumstances, is a whole other discussion. And that's why we have to make some modifications. We don't have to make modifications because the dogs are different. Because if you take the innards out, the digestive innards out of a Chihuahua and lay it out on a table and do the same thing with a wolf, the only thing that will tip you off is the size, because they will look identical. So they've not changed. They've not evolved to eat cooked food or to eat human food or whatever, to eat kibble. They haven't evolved in that way at all. They're still intact on the inside as far as their digestive faculties go. So the problem is not with them. The problem is with the food itself. And the food that we have access to in civilized circumstances is slightly different. And it does require some modifications, because mainly, just to tip my hand a little bit here, mainly it has to do with the way agricultural animals are raised in domestication. They are deliberately fattened, and nature doesn't do that. Nature doesn't deliberately fatten rabbits. Rabbits have to remain very lean in order to escape their predators. And you don't see fat rabbits. You don't see fat, squirrels and fat mice, and all of the things that, and fat fish, and all of the things that wolves and dogs eat, all the prey animals. They're all extremely lean, and the ungulates are very lean as well. So that requires some modification, and that's mainly where the trial and error has come in. how much modification does it require? How close can we replicate what a wild dog eats in our kitchen? How close can we get? Really, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so the key point there is the fact that dogs, even though they look very different on the outside, I mean, there's a whole varieties, and breeding has made a lot of changes. A lot of breeding, whether they've made them sort of larger, smaller, and all kinds of shapes and sizes. But that's a
Yeah.
key point, that internally they haven't really changed. So there's been no, as you say, they haven't evolved to be naturally eating the kinds of foods that they are being given. And that's quite key to health. I mean, we know
Mhm.
that what we eat is key to health. So that obviously gave you a big clue as to, as you say, looking at what animals eat in the wild. Now, I think there are maybe some misconceptions about dogs being mainly, or being almost entirely, carnivore. I mean, we look at wolves, and generally we see pictures, videos, or these different programs showing wolves running after the sort of, as you say, sort of herbivores, the caribou or whatever. So you tend to see them only chasing other animals. So it's probably
Right.
surprising for some people to hear that they eat other they have other sources of food, including fruits. Where was it that you discovered that they eat fruits as well? And I mean, how do you know which fruits that they are likely to eat, which are ones good? Because I know there are various different stories of what dogs can eat and can't eat. And so,
Right.
that obviously wasn't trial and error. So that would have been some research to find out what they do eat.
Right. That's kind of interesting because, the researchers do really focus on predation. When they watch wolves, um, that's what they focus on. And it's very hard to get information about the other foods that wild dogs eat, because a lot of this research that's been done has been done in the Arctic, and not much vegetation grows up there. So when the wolves don't get fed their primary foods, they just die. The wild dogs that live in more temperate zones, like the wolves that are being studied in Minnesota right now, they do have access to fruits during certain months of the year. And in fact, there was a study that was just conducted a couple years ago on a group of wolves that were found to eat 83% of their diet in blueberries in the months of July and August. And that's a big chunk. I mean, who would have thought that a few years ago? And it's not just blueberries. I mean, these same animals, when they're living close enough to humans to have access to orchards, they eat apples, they eat plums, they eat grapes. They live in the same areas where vineyards are producing, wines and table grapes. So they do eat grapes in the wild. We're told that grapes are poisonous. That's a huge myth that's happening right now in the veterinary world, and it just keeps getting perpetuated. Nobody questions it. This poison, this toxin has never been identified, but they just, it just promotes itself. It's, just snowballs. But dogs eat, we have video of coyotes climbing apple trees, and these aren't skinny, starving, desperate coyotes. They know that there's food up there and they just go get it. And, most often they wait until it falls on the ground. And that's why fruit that tends to be overripe is better for dogs than underripe fruit. But yes, they eat lots of other things besides prey. Nobody's questioning, nobody's doubting that meat is the primary food of dogs. I'm not completely persuaded that dogs can't live without it. I'm very much still on the fence about that, because I've seen far too many testimonials of people who are feeding their dogs a vegan diet. I don't do that, but I've seen far too many testimonials to just dismiss it. So, we can talk about that a little bit too if you want to, but
Yes, I was wondering if maybe the variation in the amount of meat and fruit would be relevant, or would be related to the size of the dog. So a smaller dog wouldn't necessarily be able to process that much meat because obviously it's heavier, or is it just nothing to do with the size of the dog, or it just depending on
No,
the
it is. It's proportional to the size of the dog, and everything has to be decreased appropriately when we're talking about small dogs. And when we're talking about small dogs, they obviously can't eat cows. They can't eat, geese. They can eat the flesh from those animals, but dogs also need bone matter. If they're going to eat flesh, they also need to eat bone matter. That's kind of the bulking agent for their poops when they go to the bathroom, because when they're just eating flesh, the stools can tend to be very runny. And that's just it's observed in wolves that happens too. But so it's not pathological, it's just socially unacceptable. You can't have a dog with, uncontrollable, you know, defecation problems. So bone is important, and it's important from a nutritional standpoint too. And when we're talking about feeding a little dog like a Chihuahua or a little teacup Yorkie or something like that, we have to be feeding small animals so that we can feed the bones as well. And we can talk about the types of small animals that I recommend people feed too.
Yes, I'd be happy if you wanted to go into that now or talk about it later. But I mean, as you've mentioned it, yes, I mean, I'm sure it'd be really interesting for people to find out that that it's. I mean, I think we know that dogs like chewing bones, so that's obviously quite.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that. That's quite a common sight, and so it's not unusual for people to see that. Is there a particular way that you would approach that? I mean, you've said quite clearly that small dogs should only have sort of small bones, or and obviously larger dogs can handle larger bones. So yes, if you'd like to expand on that, that would be brilliant, please.
Sure, there's a couple of different things you can do. You can buy larger animals like mature chickens or turkey or whatever and grind them yourself. And I recommend that people not buy these foods that are pre-ground by commercial processors, because unfortunately what they do is they will take the whole chicken without trimming any of the fat off. And sometimes, most often, in fact, they will use the cheapest cuts off of the chicken, like chicken backs are very cheap. The chicken frames are very cheap, what's left over after the tenders are taken off to sell for the human market. All of those things, the wings are cheap. All those things are very cheap to buy, and they're very bony, so they're good, but they also have a lot of fat, and the fat doesn't get trimmed if it's being purchased by a commercial processor and he's producing a food from that. So when you look into those foods and you find out, you start looking at the fat content, you see that it's usually up in the 50 to 60% range, and that's really way too much. So what you can accomplish by grinding yourself, and you don't have to do this, it's just one option, but that's one thing you can accomplish is you can make the food as low in fat as it is supposed to be to suit the physiology of a dog. The other thing that you can do is you can buy small animals, and when it comes to a Chihuahua or these very small, pocket dogs that they're making nowadays, it's hard to find an animal that's really small enough for them to eat. And really the only thing that I've found on the commercial market is quail. My cat eats quail, my dog eats quail. I have to go to a special store to buy it. I go to the Asian market. It's right down the street from my house. And it's quite expensive, so it's not good for a big dog. It's going to be too expensive for a big dog, but for a little dog, you find an Asian store in your area and feed your dog meat once, twice, 3 times a week. It's not that expensive if your dog's not eating meat every day. And that's sort of the basis of my rotational monofeeding type of feeding method.
I don't know if you want to go into that now in detail, or sort of save it for a bit later, but I mean, that's the point, that it's not meat every day, and it's not the same food every day, because that's pretty much what people generally feed their dogs. You know, they have the bowl of whatever it is that they're prepared, and they get the same food every day. Did you want to explain why that's not a good idea? I mean,
Well,
let's not go into the kind of manufactured food just yet. I know we will get there, but I
okay,
mean, because that is such a
sure,
huge topic. But you know,
right.
to really explain why you would suggest, well, not suggest, recommend even, that animals are fed meat on its own on different days, and other foods on sort of days in between, and also to keep them, as you say, mono feeding, what that actually means and how you put that into application, really.
Well, a synopsis of rotational monofeeding is that basically owners decide for themselves how many days per week they want to feed their dogs meat. And some people feed their dogs meat once a week, and the dogs do just great on that. Other dogs do much better eating meat 5 times a week or even more. I don't really recommend going over 5 or 6 times a week, because even when we remove a lot of the fat that we can remove from agricultural animals, it's still too rich, too fatty. It's too much food for dogs that are mostly sedentary compared to their biological counterparts out there in the wild, much more sedentary. So the way that we sort of displace all of that richness and fattiness in animal foods is we feed plant days. We feed plant matter on the other days. And these are foods that are known to be appealing, palatable, and digestible by dogs. They produce perfect poops. They satisfy the dog. They heal disease. They don't heal disease. The body heals disease. Only the body heals disease. But
Yes.
they allow a lot of energy to be directed towards healing, because they require so little digestive energy. And that's really important to understand. It will be important to understand when we talk about fasting later on, which I hope we will do. So
Yes.
that's a brief outline of what rotational monofeeding is.
Yes, I mean, definitely we'll get to fasting, because I mean that affects humans, but it'll be interesting again to talk about it with respect to animals. I mean, as you say, looking at wild animals, wolves in particular, that are the basic dog model, they don't eat every day necessarily. I mean, they,
Right.
you know, and they expend a huge amount of energy chasing their prey.
Right.
They are, of course, pack animals, so you know they have to share between them. So I mean that's a whole other thing in their behaviors, but they don't eat meat every day. There's an interesting point. You said you let the you know, the pet owners choose for themselves. So again, it's not necessarily a strict system, as it were. You know, it's sort of so many days of this, and so would that depend on the type of dog, the size of dog, or just or maybe how active the dog is as well? I mean, would that
That's a great question, Dawn, because so many factors can go into that decision. And I like to it really doesn't have so much to do with the dog, it has to do with the owner. Like rotational monofeeding has been discovered by a lot of vegans. Vegans like the idea of feeding their dogs optimally, but not having to handle meat so much. So if they're coming from that perspective, I say, if you want to feed a high plant rotation, which means the dog eats mostly plants and then once a week they eat a meat meal just to cover their nutritional bases, you can do that. If a person is very busy and they find it very time consuming to prepare plant foods, or to, if they don't like handling meat or whatever, all of these factors can come into play. And it really, we have found that there are some conditions that respond better, some medical conditions, health conditions that respond better to a dog shifting away from animal foods for a while, because I honestly think that the number one cause of dog disease is the animal fat in commercial dog foods. And a departure, the stricter the departure from that, the faster healing can take place. So if a dog has been highly medicated, like we have dogs coming in who have been drugged every day of their lives for years, and when you start feeding this diet that requires very little digestive energy, it frees up a lot of energy in the body so that the body can start cleaning out the residues of all those drugs that have been fed. Well, those things are going to be dumping back into the bloodstream, and they're going to be causing symptoms. They're going to be coming through the skin. They're going to be coming out the ears. They're going to be messing up, the digestive system. If you want to slow that process down a little bit, you can feed foods that require a little more digestive work, like animal foods, like, ground chickens, or, whole chickens, whatever. Meat, regardless of whether it is eaten by an animal that considers himself a carnivore that's really not a carnivore, or an animal who really, like a human, or an animal that really is a carnivore, is a very energy intense food. It takes a lot of energy to break it down. So that energy that's being used on digestion, if the dog is eating something, like meat, is going to be spent on digestion instead of cleansing, so that the whole process of cleansing is going to be slowed down a bit. So that can enter in as a factor as well. We've seen people come in and say, I want to feed a high plant rotation. I don't like messing with meat. And their dogs get too skinny. Well, you can't feed a dog fruit 6 days a week and expect them to keep the weight on. You can't do that. Fruit is extremely dilute, and dogs cannot make full use of plant foods. It's like, some people have referenced the pandas, and that their diets have changed because they have had to adapt, not really adapt, but sort of accommodate their loss of habitat. So they started eating, who knows how long ago, they started eating bamboo instead of prey. They're actually omnivores, and they should be eating prey, but they didn't. They sort of ran out of prey, so they started eating bamboo. And people think that they're succeeding, but they're really not. They're slowly going extinct, because that's all they do pretty much all day long is eat bamboo, because they don't make maximum use of plant foods. They're not set up that way. They don't have the convoluted intestines that we do in order to make maximum use of plant foods. And so they're just surviving. It was a survival thing. Well, that's kind of what happens with dogs too. They can go such long periods without finding prey and still manage to survive, that we can assume that they can go those same long periods eating only plant foods as well. But in order to thrive, it's my opinion that they actually do need to eat meat once in a while. It's impossible for me to quantify that. It's impossible, I think, for anybody to quantify how much is the optimal meat in the diet of a dog. So, but anyway, there's lots of different factors and there's finances too. I mean, it's a lot cheaper to feed certain plant foods than it is to feed meat, especially right now with inflation and whatnot. So that enters into it too. I want people to feed their dogs properly. I just want their dogs to stay out of the vet. They have to tweak it so that it fits their economics and their lifestyle and their schedule and their dog and their mental mindset. People come to this with all kinds of ideas in their head, that some of which they're not willing to discard, unfortunately. And so those things have to be reconciled too.
Yes, and in terms of economics, I would have thought some people would just, even if they want to give their animals meat, obviously raw meat, they would go for cheaper cuts, as you were saying, that or sort of cheaper meats. But in terms of dogs, is there a difference with the freshness of the meat? Does it have to be something that's, you know, as fresh as possible, or is that slightly different?
Well, it's a good. Did you have something else?
Yeah, no, I was
No.
just going to say, you know, is it something where they have to just have it, you know, freshly killed, or you know, it was just exploring that particular point.
Well, we can assume that it's best for dogs to eat meat that is freshly killed because most of the meat that they do eat is killed by them, right? They're not really scavengers. There are animals that are out in nature that are scavengers and they eat, meat that was killed by somebody else. But in the case of dogs, the ancestors of dogs, they pretty much did their own killing. So we can assume that it's better if they eat it fresh. But this is one of the limitations of civilization. We don't have, I'm not willing to keep live animals in my backyard and go dispatch one so my dog can have, fresh meat. And in fact, freezing is something that we have to do too, just in order to be able to have enough, food on hand and not have to shop every day. So freezing is kind of a necessary evil and it can be done repeatedly. I mean, all the time I have to buy meat that is frozen, bring it home to thaw it out so that I can parse it up into little portions and refreeze it. And that's completely acceptable. I've seen no evidence that that actually harms the dog, that can stand in the way of a dog obtaining optimal health. So, and even, and we have evidence that wolves will cache their food. And we know that wolves live in very cold climates. So when they cache their food, when they bury their food and then they go back and eat it, we can assume that sometimes it's frozen. So, it's a fairly natural phenomenon that that we can, use to our benefit. It's entirely doable. It doesn't have to be fresh.
Okay, I mean, as you say, it's a really good point that yes, wolves would bury their, bury their catch. I mean, often sort of take it back and then feed their pups, but we'll get to feeding puppies as well. So with
Mhm.
the fresh meat, I mean, obviously one of the problems, of course, is factory farming, because we know just how awfully farm and farm animals, sorry, are kept. You know, what they're subjected to in terms of just, pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, and goodness knows what else, the way they're kept. I mean, is that are there any ramifications of feeding animals from, factory farmed animals, the meat of from farms, or does that not really matter either? Or do you
Well,
recommend they
yeah.
avoid farmed animals because of what's pumped into them in terms of pharmaceuticals?
Well, it does matter, but we have to, I mean, I live in the real world. I have to feed factory farmed animals
Okay.
to my pets. But that's a very good question. And what the problem that people make the mistake of thinking that a commercial product that says it was made from some free range animal, organic animals, or whatever, is going to be better than a factory farmed animal that you buy whole, that you bring home and you trim the fat off of. And that's a huge mistake because what they're doing with those organic producers, what they're doing is they're taking the parts that are left over after what the good parts are taken off of the animal and sold for the human market. It has to be that way because economics are involved, right? And these pet food producers must buy cheap products. They must, because advertising and marketing are and packaging and processing and transportation are very expensive. That's where the money goes. The money cannot go to ingredients. The ingredients must be cheap. And there's a huge mountain of practically free potential ingredients for pet food out there in the market because we're raising all of these agricultural animals, whether we're doing it organically or in a factory farm. And what we're doing is making them be sedentary, feeding them garbage. And that's a recipe for, yes, you guessed it, obesity. And that's what they're encouraging in their animals. We humans do that experiment every day. We come home and sit on our couches and eat garbage and watch TV. Well, the animal agricultural industry was doing that a long time ago, and they call it fattening for market. It's that old euphemism, for market. Well, the animal gets to market, it weighs a ton, makes big money for the producers, and then the only thing that we want off of the animal when it's dead is the lean tissue. We want the lean tissue and maybe the ribs for our barbecue, right? What's going to happen to the rest of that animal? I'll tell you what's happening to it. And it doesn't matter whether it was raised organically or in a factory farm. It is going to the pet food market. So regardless of what a label says, and believe me, these producers know the right words to say: organically grown, locally sourced, sustainable, all the buzzwords. They know all the buzzwords, no GMOs, no this, no that. They can say all of that stuff and still put garbage in the bag. I guarantee it. Or even in the container if it's a raw frozen product. But no, you can buy whole factory farmed cuts of meat, pieces of meat, animals, bring them home, trim them, and they will make perfectly suitable food for dogs. It's just a mistake to believe those labels and to not think that you can do better. You can do far better. We can't remove everything. Like if I buy a Cornish game hen, there's a lot of fat on that animal that I can trim, but there's a lot of fat there that I can't trim. It surrounds the organs. It's marbling inside the muscles. It's between the ribs, and these ribs are very tiny. I can't trim any of that. So even so, my animal is still going to be getting too much fat. And that's where this displacement of the richness and the fattiness I was talking about before comes into play when we either fast our dogs when they're not eating on a meat day, or feed them plant foods.
Right, that's the important balance. That if
Right.
you are only able to get sort of the kind of meats where there is more fat than you'd like, it's possible that people might want to then have more fruit days or more fast days and not so much meat, just because of the fat content. I mean, would you like to explain a little bit more why the fat content is so bad? I mean, the idea of, oh, well, the animals are fattened up. The farm animals are fattened up because it's a good thing, because they're sold by weight. It's not because it's good per se. It's because it's just the weight thing. And
Right.
I mean, we'll come into the actual
Mm-mm.
manufactured food products that they call dog food a bit later, but it's just if we stay on the fat, because I know that plays into that as well, that kind of extends into that. So if we can just to explain why it's not good for dogs to eat too much fat.
Well, it's not only because there's too much of it in the diet of domestic dogs because of the way agricultural animals are raised. It's not just the differential. It's that the fat of these agricultural animals contains residues of the crap that is injected into them,
Right.
the drugs that are given to them, and the foods that are given to them. Fat is more in a species that is not designed to carry fat for inherent biological purposes, like when a bear eats a lot to fatten himself up, that's different. In an animal that is not designed that way, like in humans, for example, we're supposed to be long and lean. When we're not, that's more about storage than insulation or fuel, fuel storage. It's not really about fuel storage. It's more about toxic storage. Because you can overeat all you want to if you're eating the right foods and you're not going to get fat. But all it takes is overeating a little bit of the wrong foods and you're going to get fat, because fat is more about the body putting stuff away that it can't deal with right now, that it can't eliminate. And that's why it's kind of, um, it can be uncomfortable for a very obese dog or cat to make a sudden shift in their diet, like suddenly going from eating kibble every day, an obese dog, for example, going from eating kibble every day to eating nothing but fruit. I mean, that's going to elicit some um, what's called autolysis, or, the breaking down of the fat cells. And in that process, out comes the drug residues as well, and it can be uncomfortable. But it's the fact that the fat is used on agricultural animals to store residues of these harmful substances. And when your dog eats those, they're eating the same garbage that was pumped into the animal and that was fed to the animal.
Right. With the digestive system, it is more capable of breaking down the sort of certain toxins rather than when it's injected into the body. But I mean,
Right,
that's an excellent point of the toxins being held in the fat. So with an obese dog, where the owner says, owner, you know what I mean. We want to improve the health of our dog. You wouldn't put them straight on that kind of diet. You would suggest that they transition
yeah,
slowly so that it's not such a shock to the system. But also, as you say, once um, the garbage starts coming out, I mean, that could be quite difficult. And like with humans, when we undergo detoxification, there are
exactly.
symptoms, and everyone says, "Oh, I'm ill," and rushes off to the doctor, or
Right.
in this case, the vet. So it's important for people who have pets, I mean, we're talking mainly dogs here, to understand what symptoms are. I mean, you're talking about, loose stools, and obviously that's not to say, oh, they've got a disease. And again, we have to put air quotes around the word disease because we know these are just labels. But that's the point, that we're all indoctrinated into the idea that these symptoms, which are the body's natural processes of trying to heal itself, healing itself, and then they're stopped as if there's something bad. But obviously with a dog, a cat as well, there's a limit to how much they can tell you how uncomfortable or comfortable they are. So again, obviously it would depend on the animal, the owner, and how healthy or not healthy the animal was in the first place. So again, is obesity one of the main problems with dogs, or certain dogs?
No, there's no way, we have no way of knowing. We just want to do this as in a way that causes the least discomfort for the animal, right?
Yeah.
We want it to be smooth, and it's not like a dog. If somebody makes that mistake, if somebody suddenly decides that, they love fruit and they want to feed fruit to their dog and they think fruit heals everything, people sometimes think that. And the dog used to eat kibble. The dog's going to get well. The dog's going to be, they're going to slim down and have lots of energy and get well. But it's you can do it in a more, methodical way. You can do it in a way that, keeps the dog comfortable. And if you try to do that for yourself, it's like when you're eating the standard Western diet and you go off to a 21-day fast or whatever, you're going to be pretty uncomfortable while all of that stuff exits your body. Well, it would probably be better for you to make a slow transition to a biologically appropriate diet before you go off and fast for 20 days or whatever, and to just kind of slow that process down. And anybody who discovers biologically appropriate eating for themselves also usually soon discovers that if they keep some of those old foods in their diet that they used to eat, they won't get these intense symptoms that make them want to just, go to the nearest pizza place or whatever, we're kind of managing the transition to the extent that we can, because we can't feel what's going on inside of a dog and they can't tell us. So there's a lot of guesswork involved. And that's another big secret of the veterinary industry. There's a lot of guesswork involved in what's really going on when a dog has symptoms. But I love the idea of talking about symptoms, what they mean, and what the body is trying to do with them. Because last time we spoke, you mentioned the article that I wrote about parvo and how I have sort of parsed out all of the symptoms and explained what they are and what the body is trying to do with them. And it's an absolute crime that people have been made so afraid of symptoms. They are always the body either trying to eliminate or compensate for some mistake that you're making. So just correct the mistake, just correct the mistake and the body will regulate itself. It'll normalize itself. And pet owners they really need to understand that, because they are more susceptible to the fear mongering that happens in the medical profession than even, in the human sector.
Yes, because again, the animals can't necessarily communicate. You did mention fasting, so I didn't know if you wanted to sort of talk about fasting before we then go on to the symptoms, because they're related, or talk about symptoms and the fasting, which order do you think? But I mean, you'd mentioned fasting, so it might be a good idea to, is that something that you would encourage for, say, an obese dog? I mean, as you say, the transition from the standard way of feeding dogs to then wanting to transition to something that's healthier. I mean, would you encourage the owners to introduce fast days so that their bodies can actually start processing what's in it before they transition to the sort of fruit? Or a lot of it obviously will depend on the dog, the owner, the health, what the owners can do. So we're not saying that this is what to do, as it were, but these are ideas that can help in that transition phase. Because as you say, it's difficult to go straight from, humans have the same thing, if they kind of, well, no, I want to change my diet, change overnight, and then they have symptoms, they think, oh no, it doesn't suit me. So it would be the same for dogs, except that the dog can't then say, my tummy hurts, I've got a headache, whatever. When your animals aren't well, I would imagine that's fairly obvious. But if you'd like to go through the fasting, and then we can go into the symptoms thing as well. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fasting doesn't get talked about very much with regard to animals. It's almost kind of a taboo topic, and when it does get talked about, it's like in the circles where people are feeding raw meat, it's called PMR, pre-model feeding, pre-model raw. They talk a lot about fasting one day a week, and that's pretty much what people are limited to in their thinking when they come into RMF, which is rotational monofeeding. And I introduce the idea of extended fasting, because it's only when the body stops using its ready fuel that it can go deep and really do some serious healing of the body. And we see that all the time in humans. It's kind of, it's discouraged among doctors because they don't understand it. So we don't have a lot of fasting facilities here in the United States, because the United States is pretty much run by the pharmaceutical industry, but there are some around the world that are, offshore, and they just pump out healthy people every day. People come in with chronic diseases and they leave healthy, and they stay that way as long as they change the habits that caused the problem in the first place. But this idea of extended fasting is something that really has not made entree yet into the pet owning world. And it's really unfortunate, because dogs, most symptoms that dogs have can be resolved through fasting, and sometimes only resolved through fasting. Only the
Wow.
body can sort it out when it doesn't have anything else to do. Many times I've seen people have this idea in their heads that 3 days is their maximum. 3 days is the most that they can let their dog or cat fast. And when the symptom doesn't go away after 3 days, they have to make the decision whether they're going to continue living with the symptom and watch their animal suffer, or if they're going to feed, or if they're going to continue to fast and live with the angst that produces in their minds, which is misplaced, because fasting is an intelligent, deliberate, compassionate thing to do. It allows the body to heal. It solves the problem once, and then the problem doesn't come back as long as you feed the animal correctly from that point on. It sometimes takes more than one fast, but this is the sensible way. This is the correct way. There is a correct way. There is a truthful way. And this is it, because the body has figured this out for us over the millions of years that humans and dogs have been walking around on this planet. It knows how to normalize itself if you get out of its way. And that's really what fasting is about. So there are many symptoms that are best approached with fasting. And we can talk about symptoms when we get into that, which symptoms should be approached with fasting.
Well, did you want to continue with that as we're talking about fasting, or the fact that I mean, it's interesting that you also mentioned cats, and we know that cats are somewhat more independent than dogs, so they might run out and then decide to eat. So how I mean, it's an interesting concept. So how would you encourage a cat to fast if it's a cat that sort of goes outside? Or
that's a great question, because cats represent a little bit of an exception to the rule, although I have very good reasons to doubt the rule that cats should not be fasted. And we're hearing this all the time from vets, that cats should not be fasted. And there is some legitimacy to that, because cats are so ill-suited to fat in their diets, to either consuming fat, that even when their own bodies autolyze the fat during a fast in order to make use of the fuel, that will cause a problem for the liver, and they can end up with something called hepatic lipidosis, which is just fatty liver disease. I strongly suspect that this is only a problem in obese cats with compromised livers. So we have a very small segment of the cat population that can't fast, but we don't know which ones they are, right? We don't know exactly which ones can't fast. So, it's best to be conservative with regard to fasting in cats, because all you really have to do to solve a cat's physical ailments is just start feeding them properly. And they need extremely lean diets. Cats should never be fed commercial food. They should be fed meats that you can buy in the store, and trim yourself, and make sure that you buy meats that you can get most of the fat off for them. So, with regard to cats, they do represent a bit of an exception. Now, having said that, I have fasted my own cat. I have fasted him 3 times for 5 days each, and he's fine. He does fine. The fasting clears up his symptoms, and everything goes just as it should, when you're trusting the body to heal itself, like I do. I've also had experiences where cats were fasted inadvertently. I rescued a couple of cats one time that were locked in a house, and there may have been a little bit of kibble that was left for them. I don't know about that, but I rescued them 3 weeks after the house had been locked. So they were left in the house for 3 weeks without food. and they were able to drink water from the toilets. So, so they were able to stay alive, but they were extremely skinny, but they didn't die. You know, they didn't get fatty liver disease, and they were both fat cats. They, you know, they didn't die. Like vets are always telling us, oh, cats will die if they don't get fed, you know, every day or every other day or whatever they say. So, you know, I just have reason to suspect that limitation that they put on fasting comes mostly from fear. And there is a lot of fear around fasting in the medical profession, whether we're talking about vets or doctors.
Yes, I mean, you were talking about looking at dogs in the wild. I mean, you only have to look at the, you know, cats in the wild, like the big cats, you know, they will eat, um, you know, probably a big meal. I mean, you know, I've always loved watching the sort of animal programs, but you know, it's hard, you know, they have a kill and they fill themselves and you see these huge bellies and it could be days before they eat again. So
Yes.
they naturally fast. It would seem very odd to say, oh, you can't fast a cat. And you think, well, the big cats, they manage to do that quite fine. Um,
Right.
are the types of meats you would choose for a cat the kind of very similar to what you choose for a dog, or would there be any particular differences? I mean, obviously choosing meats that are, you know, not heavily laden with fat, but is that the only factor, or is there anything else that in the choices of the meat you would use for a cat as for a dog? I mean, or do you have the same meats for both, or
That's a great question because people who advocate feeding raw meat to cats will often say, oh, a cat wouldn't take down a buffalo, or a cat wouldn't be able to take down a cow or whatever. So you shouldn't feed beef. And that's really nonsense because the body is going to treat protein the same, whether it, you know, moved a leg or flapped a wing or whatever. It's protein, it's muscle tissue. So you can feed beef, you can feed pork, chicken, turkey, fish, anything that you can buy at the store that you can bring home and trim of fat. Dog or cats do not require as much bone in their diets as dogs do. Dogs, dogs really have the stool issue. You know, they get runny stools when they have meat that is not accompanied by bone. Cats don't have that issue because they go outside or they go to the litter box, and you know, we don't have to deal with it. So and they just don't have as much, it seems, nutritional need for bones either. So I feed my own cat, you know, like I said before, quail, but I also feed him game hens for the bone matter. But the rest of the time, he gets those other lean meats that I mentioned.
oh, okay, right. And but cats only eat meat, yes? Yes.
Much. You know, you have to leave it up to the cat. I've known other people who have said, oh, my cat won't leave me alone when I'm even eating avocados or when I'm eating melons or whatever. They want some too. And I found that true in at least two cats that I have had. They really like honeydew melon and cantaloupe, but they don't like watermelon, won't touch it. And they like avocados. And pretty much those are the only plant foods that my cats have ever shown any interest in. But I do hear stories all the time, and I even see videos of cats eating other plant foods. So, you know, I would say if you can have a cat and feed them in the, you know, on the model of the rotational monofeeding like we do with dogs, it's perfectly fine, because I think there can be a problem of overfeeding in cats if they eat the products of animal agriculture every day and then lay around. You know, they lay around the house, especially indoor cats, lay around the house. They don't get a lot of exercise, and they eat these, you know, fatty, you know, agricultural products. And it could only do them good to eat plant foods every other day. It's just that not very many of them will go along with that kind of program.
It's interesting that your cat decided to join you in the background in the other room, so it obviously heard you talking.
Oh, he's been hovering. He's been hovering around here in the kitchen. He thinks he's going to get another
Oh,
breakfast.
right.
He got
Oh,
done.
okay. It's just, yeah. No, I've been, slight distraction, but obviously when you've got animals. So, I mean, I think, well, for me, I mean, I don't have either a dog or a cat, never have. So this, a lot of this
Mhm.
is new to me, but I don't know how new it would be to our audiences. But obviously, very important for them to realize that there is a different way of feeding their animals, that they can do it more naturally, that there are other foods that they can introduce into their diet and give them the natural foods that they that are biologically appropriate, and also to introduce fruits. I mean, I have heard of dogs that eat vegetables. I mean, do you have any views on vegetables, or would you say it's only fruits, or do you have any ideas on that, please?
Yes, I have some ideas about that. Vegetables vegetables are not really appropriate for dogs. There's this idea out there in the human nutritional world that vegetables are like magic foods, right? Vegetables are actually kind of hard to break down. They're very dense in cellulose, they're lower in sugar, they're lower in water, and sometimes the low sugar is a good thing, but when, sugar is fuel, so we want the fuel, and fruit has the advantage over vegetables in that the proteins are the amino acids are free. They don't have to be broken down. And we even hear fruit referred to as the pre-digested food, right? Well, the problem where dogs are concerned is they don't have this flat surface area. I have a model of dog dentition right here, and you can see that all of their teeth are pretty much pointy. I mean, all they can do really is they can use these back molars here, and you will see see the dogs using them when they're eating fruit, when they're eating anything actually. But all they can do is briefly crush the food before they swallow it. And that's okay with regard to fruit because it's pre-digested, right? Not very much. It just doesn't need to be broken down very much. That's not the case with vegetables. If you're going to eat, say, a raw sweet potato or a raw carrot, something like that, you find that you have to chew and chew and chew and chew and chew. And we humans, we mix our food with our saliva before we swallow, and dogs don't do that at all. The only purpose really that their saliva serves is that it lubricates the food so that it will slide easily down the esophagus, but they do not have digestive enzymes in their saliva like we do, and their saliva is much more viscous. But none of this does any good with regard to vegetables because a lot of people will feed their dogs carrots because the dog, likes chomping on them or whatever. They kind of pretend like they're a bone. They give their dog a carrot, and the dog takes it off in the garden and eats it. But the problem with that is you will find it in the poop in the exact shape and size that it was chewed into, which means it was chewed, it went down the esophagus, it stayed in the stomach, it went through intact. It didn't provide any nutrition at all to the dog. So
So it's
there's
not
really,
digested.
it's not digested, it's not being made use of, it's just waste. It's sort of taxed the dog. It took more than it gave back. So, there's a lot of talk in the home feeding, home dog feeding world about feeding vegetables. And most people do cook their vegetables, and cooked vegetables are easier
That's
for
what I was
dogs to
about to ask. Yeah.
digest. Yes, and that's really the only place that cooking has in the diet of domestic dogs, because there are certain vegetables that when they are cooked become very sweet and palatable and digestible by dogs. And a couple of those are sweet potatoes and yams and squashes and even carrots if they're cooked very well. Things like green beans if they're cooked very well. As long as they are soft and they don't have to be chewed very much, they can be digested, and dogs, really like them. I've hardly seen a dog that will pass up a cooked sweet potato or yam. They're very sweet. They're like fruit. And you can test this out yourself. If you eat a raw yam, put it in your mouth, it's not very sweet. But if you take a bite of a baked yam, it's very sweet, and that's because there's more sugar. It's more sugar that's readily available there. And that's one, it's just another food that you can feed to dogs.
I was just about to ask if you're happy to sort of stay with this for a while, is the sugar point, because often people will say, oh, there's fructose in fruit, and so it's too you're not supposed to have that much sugar, and sugar leads to obesity. I mean, we know that fruit sugars are not the same because they're held in a in the right form, and the body digests it along with the enzymes. So that isn't a problem, obviously, for dogs either. I mean, just really to sort of reiterate that, or to sort of dispel that myth about the sugar in fruit,
Right.
that it's not
Yeah.
bad. And the same for dogs as well. That's not something to be concerned about, because otherwise you'll get obese dogs.
Yes, no, I see this all the time in people coming into RMF who have this idea in their heads that vegetables are healthier than fruits because of their low sugar content, and they feed the dog a vegetable heavy diet instead of fruit, which I think is a mistake, because the raw food, we don't see dogs eating cooked vegetables in the wild, but we see them eating raw fruits. That's important information that we shouldn't ignore. And the sugar has gotten a bad reputation on false premises anyway, because it's the granulated sugar, it's the processed sugar that is harmful. And even fruit sugar can be harmful if you're eating too much fat. If you're eating lots of fat, if you're doing the keto diet, or if you're doing the paleo diet, or one of these diets that, involves eating lots of fat, everybody who does that is going to tell you, don't eat sugar, don't eat sugar, because you know what? If you eat a lot of fat and you also eat a lot of sugar, your sugar is not going to be able to get into your cells, and you're not going to be able to create energy, and it's going to invite yeast, and it's going to invite a whole lot of problems in your body. So it's the presence of fat that causes the problems with sugar. People who stop eating all of that fat and stop feeding it to their animals find that fruit sugar causes them no problems in themselves or in their dogs. People who have chronic diseases and come into biologically appropriate eating, their diseases go away. Even though they're eating all of this sugar. Oh, there's so much sugar. Be afraid of sugar. No, it's almost like, we're being taught to be afraid of the things that are most helpful to us, right? Be afraid of your symptoms. Your symptoms are your body healing itself. Be afraid of fruit sugar. Fruit sugar is, people are being told not to eat fruit if they have cancer, for crying out loud. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's opposite. It's the opposite of what people should be doing. Fruit requires no digestive energy. It's, like I said before, it's pre-digested. It's going to allow the body to devote all of that energy that would otherwise be going to digestion to healing, to turning those cancer cells back into normal, healthy cells. That's what people should be doing. But no, they're told not to eat fruit. It's just upside down land over there in the medical industry.
Absolutely.
As you know.
Yes, and that's by intention, of course, because they want to keep people, they want to keep customers. It's as simple as that. I mean, there are other aspects, but that's the one of the underlying problems, that it's about customers, because healthy people aren't very good customers, aren't customers at all for the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
Talking of diseases, chronic diseases, are there any that particularly affect dogs? Is there anything that dogs tend to experience? I don't mean diseases, because there aren't diseases as such, but the
Yep,
kind
the labels.
the labels, but the kind of chronic problem, shall we say, and then maybe we can move into the symptoms. But yes, chronic health problems other than obesity, of course.
Yeah, everything that we experience in civilization as humans is reflected in the dog population. They're getting the same chronic diseases that we have, and they're being treated with the same drugs, and very often the drugs will be found to be very harmful to humans, and they're taken off the market for humans, but they're dumped into the pet industry. The vet.
Wow.
I was just reading about oh, it's a motility drug. It's a gastric motility drug that was taken off the market for humans, but it's now marketed for dogs. And who knows what's going on behind the scenes there, what causes it to be taken off the market and how they figure it's okay to sell it for dogs. There's no such thing as veterinary malpractice. If you won your malpractice suit with a vet, you'd get the $200 back that your dog cost you or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's no such thing as malpractice. So there's far less risk in having these drugs on the market for, to be given to dogs. But just about everything. But dogs seem to cleanse more through their skin than humans do. I mean, I know humans do early in life with the measles and the chicken pox and all of those things that afflict, and acne, things that afflict humans early in life. But dogs do a lot of eliminating through their skin. So the biggest economic boon right now, and has been for the last 20, 30 years in veterinary medicine, is so-called allergies. And it's all about stuff coming through the skin. It's all about the body looking for some outbound avenue to send waste that it can't deal with via the primary organs of elimination. So out it goes out through the ears, and it goes out, the skin, and the hair falls out, and the dog constantly scratches, and, all of those things. And what the body can't eliminate, it has to deal with internally. So the wastes also perpetually circulate in the bloodstream and wreak havoc with the organs. And when that happens, voila, you have chronic disease, just like in humans.
Oh, okay. I mean, yes, it is a big problem. Um, the idea that animals, well, again, it's not getting diseases, these are, again, symptoms, but very interesting, of course, is recognizing the elimination process through the skin. And that happens to animals. But of course, they then say, oh, well, it's this, give it a label, put this cream, lotion, potion, and everything else, pharmaceuticals. I mean, I would suggest one of the possibilities with the pharmaceuticals being transferred from the human market to the animal market, maybe the drug cost a lot to actually develop, and somewhere along the line somebody, maybe a lobbyist, suggested that it might be a good idea not to take it off, well, to not kind of remove it completely, but to find another use for it. I mean, we know there's lots of off-label sales of pharmaceuticals for humans anyway, so why not dogs?
I'm sure.
Because they're just lesser creatures, aren't they? Well, that doesn't matter, it's
Yes.
only a dog.
Right. Well, I'm sure there's all kinds of secondary avenues when it
Yeah.
comes to what happens to the drugs that have already been manufactured when they get taken off the market. And the dog, the vet sector is just one of those avenues.
Would you like to talk about the symptoms of, a bit more with respect to, I mean, not just parvo, but using that as an example for the kinds of things that happen to animals? But parvo is said to mainly affect puppies, isn't it?
And
So,
parvo is kind of like
or
the
I should
measles.
do parvo in inverted commas, but yes.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's like a childhood disease that we experience as humans. It presents itself as and it normally happens within a few weeks of weaning. but it can happen anytime. It depends on how long it takes for the body to reach the saturation point that it reaches when it needs to institute symptoms. So this can happen anytime within a few weeks after weaning to, up to 6 months. And that's why it usually afflicts puppies, but it just presents as loss of appetite initially, listlessness, lethargy, when the owner continues to feed, when the dog continues to eat. They have digestive issues, they either throw up or they have diarrhea, and that's just the body going, I've had enough of that stuff. I need to get rid of not only what you're eating now, but I also need to work on getting rid of what you ate yesterday and the day before that and the many weeks since I was eating the perfect food that came out of mom. So all of that stuff that I've been fed since then has been piling up and piling up and piling up, and now we need a break. But if the food keeps coming in, then the body has to take it upon itself to get rid of the food. It cannot process it. This is a problem for the veterinary industry. The veterinary industry says, we have to shut that down. We can't allow the puppy to not eat. So we have to stop the puppy from throwing up. So they will give some anti-nausea or like Cerenia or some anti-emetic, or give some other drug that is designed to keep food in that would otherwise be eliminated through the colon via diarrhea. So that's when the trouble begins. When, these symptoms always begin very mildly, like the symptom, but anybody who's feeding their dog, feeding their puppy garbage, they're not likely to recognize when the puppy is having a little bit of an issue. Like, if it was me, I would go, oh, my puppy doesn't seem to want to eat today. Okay, no problem. I'll feed him something else. I'll feed him something that I know is less energy, consumptive, or I will not feed him at all and see how he feels tomorrow. Well, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because people are so afraid of letting their dogs do without food that, the first thing that they present with, they're off to the vet, and then the drugs come out. And it's no wonder that puppies die of parvo. And you know what? Even dogs that are vaccinated for parvo get parvo, because about the PCR test. When a dog that's recently been vaccinated presents to the vet with the symptoms of parvo, they go, oh, well, it can't be parvo because we have the vaccine in place, right? So we must look for this other boogeyman, and they will do that. And it's a very self-fulfilling system. But, it's kind of interesting. I was telling you last time we talked about this book that I received from a friend that was written in 1965 about, it was like a little 4-H project somebody wrote about dog care. And it lists all of the diseases that were, in vogue then. And it doesn't list parvo at all. So this was probably written in 1965. That was, 55 years ago, 45, something like that, 55 years ago. And so this big, bad boogeyman, parvo, that looks exactly like distemper. It has the same symptoms as what we used to call distemper.
Yeah.
Was invented, and now look at the success that it has created. I'm surprised that we haven't had 3 or 4 parvos come out since then, because it's a huge cash cow. They sell the vaccines. I mean, people are so frightened of taking their puppies out, when they're still puppies, like they're supposed to be. So they get socialized. So they're not afraid of the world that they're going to be living in. They're so afraid they'll leave their puppies in. They'll keep them isolated from other dogs. And we have dogs growing up fearing the outside world, fearing their own kind, fearing everything that moves, because they're afraid to let their dog step on grass, because vets are telling them that the parvo virus lasts for 7 years on grass. Unless you have lived in your house for 7 years and you know for sure that there hasn't been a dog with parvo out there on your grass, you better keep your puppy. I mean, it's just nuts. It's
It-
just
it-
nuts.
yes, it is. It is insanity. It is, of course, based on the idea of viruses anyway. So it's another reason for that all to go. Can I ask one question? You're talking about sort of, feeding puppies. Are animals just as prone to eating even if they're not well? Then I kind of had the impression that animals, if they weren't feeling well, they'd just go off into a corner and rest, and they wouldn't eat. So how are they eating when they don't feel like it, if they're not
Right,
well? How does that work?
right.
Just curious.
That's a very good question, because in the wild, we don't see sick dogs eating. We don't see injured dogs eating. They're not able to eat. History, their biological history has set them up to heal while they are fasting. The two go hand in hand. They're not separated. They don't have other members of the pack bringing them food. It doesn't happen. They just don't. They go off. They find the darkest, quietest place that they can find, and they fast and they heal. When it comes to domestic dogs, they have had their feeding autonomy taken from them. They're completely dependent on us, and we condition them to eat every day. It becomes a matter of behavioral conditioning for them to
Right.
eat every day. And they can sometimes eat when it's not in their best interest. Now, a lot of dogs will listen to their body's inner wisdom and not eat when they're symptomatic, or when they're not feeling well, or when their bodies need a break or whatever. And but a lot of dogs won't. They'll just continue to eat. And that's why we as humans have to make the decision for them. And it's a very deliberate, like I said, deliberate, intelligent thing to do. In fact, I have a bunch of videos on my YouTube channel, and I got a comment yesterday from somebody who said, and I suspect this was left by a troll, but it's an honest question. And the question is, do you eat while you're fasting your dog? Do you eat in front of your dog while you're fasting him? And I guess, that's meant to imply that I'm, a monster, that I would eat in front of my dog while I'm depriving them of food or whatever. But it's a legitimate question. People think that all the time. And I would say, yes. And you know what? The last time I fasted myself for 6 or 7 days because I had a cold or whatever, I continued to feed my dog, because I'm not fasting them to punish them. I don't fast to punish myself. I fast in response to symptoms. I fast them in response to their symptoms. It's a compassionate thing to do. It allows the symptom to rectify itself, to go away completely and not come back. And when it does come back, if it does come back, I have the tools to resolve it again, and then to correct the mistakes that caused the symptom. That's in my power. So no, yeah, we have to get around all of this emotionalism around fasting. We have to do things logically and in sort of a detached way if we want to do right by our animals.
Yes. So the question is, does this thing that's called parvo, or distemper? I mean, I have heard of distemper, so yeah, but it's amazing that word seems to have disappeared. Does that happen for puppies that are fed through your sort of rotational monofeeding? No. So it is the food, and
it's impossible. It's impossible.
right.
It's
Yes.
impossible for that to happen.
Just clearing
Yeah.
that point, that so people understand that it actually doesn't happen when you're feeding them correctly. So the point is, what is it they're being fed that is so incorrect? And I think that moves us into the manufactured dog food stuff, so-called food, these products. And well, if you can keep it brief, because I know there are a lot of problems with those products, and I've with your book, I mean, it's just horrendous what is given the label food, and given to animals. But of course, well, it doesn't matter, they're just animals, so we can just give them all the rubbish, as you say, all the sort of garbage that isn't saleable for the human market. So could you give us a sort of an overview of the manufactured, I won't call it even food, the manufactured products that are given, that are sold as food, shall we say?
Yeah, that's another conversation altogether. We could probably do, another couple hours just talking about manufactured dog food because there
Okay.
are so many problems. But the main problem is that, yeah, we can dump all of this waste into the pet, sector, but we have to say the right words on the label. How cheap is that? I mean, it's not hard to put the right words on a label and get this governing body. There's an organization called AAFCO. It's the American something for feed feed control, animal feeds in the United States, and it's pretty much worldwide, I think, this organization. And it pretends to oversee the pet food industry, but they're just a bunch of industry insiders, and they have invented this criteria and allowed pet food manufacturers to get away with putting the most ridiculously obscure information on labels so that pet owners don't have any idea what they're getting and what they're feeding their dogs. But it's, the puppies come from eating perfect food in the form of mother's milk, of course, and then immediately they go to eating puppy food or some homemade replica of puppy food that is sometimes almost as bad. And that's what causes this slow accumulation of waste in the body that the puppy eventually will need a break from. And sometimes it presents as the symptoms of parvo, and sometimes it will, it'll be something else. It'll be skin itching or ear itching or whatever. But with all of those things, it's just off to the vet, right? Off to the vet to shut it down. And that just makes the problem bigger. But manufactured food, pet food, is categorically, entirely, even if it says that it is human grade food, you can take a truckload of human grade chickens that are destined to be fed to humans. You can take the backs and the necks and the heads and the feet off of those chickens, feed everything else, or sell everything else to the human market. So you'll make, $5 a pound or whatever. And nobody wants the other stuff because it's so fatty. Well, you're lucky to get 50 cents a pound, but you can get it from the pet food processors, and they will say on their labels, human grade ingredients, So, but it's the cuts that humans don't want. They're not taking the chicken tenders off to the pet food factory. They're not taking the lean steaks or the lean roasts. Those are being sold in the grocery stores for people. Those aren't going to and it doesn't matter what they say on the label. They have figured out ways of making their products sound really good, even though it's always what's left over, whether you want to call it waste or not. It's the cheap stuff that's left over after we produce the foods that we want to eat. We want the chicken tenders. We want the roasts. And the rest, we have to deal with the wings and the backs and the heads. They have to go somewhere. We don't want to eat them, even though we like to think that we're carnivores. We don't want to eat those things, but, they have to go somewhere, and they go into the pet food processing industry.
I mean, it's amazing how so many industries have managed to, well, I mean, just take the, the whole thing with fluoride, that's a waste product from an industrial process that's then labeled as being, good or whatever. Oh, just
Right.
put it in the water. Oh,
Yes.
make up a story that it's good. It's the same kind of thing, although maybe not
Same
quite as
concept.
toxic, but it's the same concept. It's just, well, that's rubbish. Well, we can't throw it. Well, we should throw it away. Well, actually, we can find something to do with it.
Right,
Oh, let's give it to animals, you know.
right, right.
And there are so many problems with the whole animal food. I mean, not just pet animals, with, you know, farmed animals, and they're fed things that are totally inappropriate. I mean, you know, but you know, as you say, that's a whole other story. One of the foods that animals are given, and you've mentioned it before, but just to explain a bit more about what's called kibble, which is the dry dog food, isn't it? And
Yes.
why that's a problem. I mean, because it's not supposed, because they're not supposed to eat it. But I mean, what is it?
Yeah.
Is there anything particular to do with the kibble, or is it just because it's totally inappropriate for dogs, they can't digest it? And I mean, I'm curious that, you know, animals are eating things that I suppose, yes, pets are quite good at, you know, doing what they're told. I suppose if they're hungry, they'll eat anything. But just the fact that if it's totally inappropriate, that they will eat these foods. So I'm just, you know, it's interesting.
This is a science on its own. This is the only science that goes into these so-called scientifically formulated. It's figuring out how to fool a dog into thinking that's food. And they do it with all kinds of special little ingredients, one of which is the grease that they collect from restaurants that has been used to fry foods. They'll put that in kibble. And I mean, they figured out all kinds of ways, but you know, and dogs will eat ordinary things like scotch tape and tissues, because these animal waste products end up in lots of things that we don't think they end up in. And dogs have a very keen sense of smell. When a dog eats something that we think is inedible, sometimes it's because it has animal products in it and they can smell that. Well, it's the same with kibble. Almost all kibble has something that's appealing in its natural form to dogs. And these people that produce kibble have, like I said, made a science out of figuring out how to get that garbage into dogs, how to get them to eat it willingly. But there is so much wrong with it. It represents how gaslit we, the pet owning public, are by the vet industry and the pet food industry, because just, you know, put a chicken leg or something that resembles something that a wolf would eat in the wild in your hand, and then put some kibble in the other, and just, you know, just ponder how different those are, and how, you know, how far removed from that chicken leg the kibble is, and all of the processes that it had to go through. Well, this industry, these two industries, the pet food industry and the veterinary industry that are enabling each other, they have made up this nonsense that all you have to do is figure out the nutrients that a dog will need in his lifetime. And you just take those things from everywhere, you put them through 100 different processes, put them in this little burnt brown ball, and you can feed that to the dog for the rest of his life and he'll be perfectly fine. There are people that are saying that with a straight face. I guarantee they spent 7 or 8 years in veterinary nutrition school. I mean, these people are qualified vets. They are qualified veterinary doctors, and they also go on to do nutritional training. So they have additional, so they get even more brainwashed and more persuaded that this nonsense has validity. I mean, you know, it just boggles the mind how some people can be so persuaded. But, you know, like I'm always telling people, you know, people go to vet school because they love animals, right? Everybody says, oh, if you love animals, go to vet school. Vets are around animals all day. It's a great job. Yeah. Well, they don't go to vet school with all of the knowledge that they need in order to feed a dog properly. They go to vet school basically as sponges and they just soak everything in. And if you think industry doesn't take advantage of that situation, think again. Industry's been here a long time and they've had lots of opportunities to worm their way into the curricula that teaches those vets and the people that drive and run the pet food industry to influence them, you know, and to practically teach them what they want them to say to us as the pet owning public. And it's so self-fulfilling.
Yes, I mean it's so closely paralleled with the medical industry and the
Yes.
pharmaceutical industry. There is one slight difference though, as you were saying, that the pet food industry does have a way in to the vets, and vets actually you actually say that they recommend um certain food. Well, they actually recommend the foods that the pets should eat, which is not something that doctors do. I mean, even if they might talk about diet, or eat some more fresh food or whatever, it's not
Right.
anywhere near. I mean, I know the advertising is far worse in the US than anywhere else in terms of pharmaceuticals. I assume it's the same for the pet industry, but the vets are actually, I nearly said pushing, but I mean they're promoting certain
Yes.
animal so-called food products. I mean that's outrageous, but obviously it is an influence, it's a vested interest. And it just, as you say, boggles the mind that vets don't think, hang on a minute, why are you telling me to push this food when they should have learned about nutrition? But of course they probably don't get nutrition training in vet school, medical school, in the same way as medical students don't get nutrition training in medical school, maybe a few hours in the course of 5 years or something. So I mean, there are very, very clear parallels, but that is one extra point. I mean, are there different types of pet foods that these vets actually promote, or is it certain types, or does it just, it doesn't matter? I mean, though it just depends on whoever, whichever salesman visits them, and they'll just promote their foods, or is it more strict than that in terms of what they can recommend?
Uh, I don't really know what
Okay.
factors cause vets to be more propagandized by one brand over another. I suppose that some of them do have alliances with certain pet food companies and they give talks in front of their conferences and whatnot. And, there's a lot of, intermingling there. But, where the vets are really behind even the human doctors is that there's no human doctor that's telling people that they should just sit down and eat this special cereal that has every known human nutrient in it 3 times a day and they'll be healthy. But almost every single vet will tell you that, and they will chastise you for doing otherwise. They will tell you it's hazardous to do otherwise. There is no doctor on earth that's going to tell you it's hazardous to feed your child fresh foods. But vets will tell people that it's playing Russian roulette with their dog if they feed fresh foods because it will be imbalanced, because the pet food industry has so persuaded everybody that these buzzwords that they use called complete and balanced actually have meaning, and that it means that if you feed if unless you feed nothing but those foods, the diet's going to be thrown off balance. It's absolutely extrapolated out of the ether. It's there's no basis for any of it in reality. It's made up, manufactured nonsense, and this is what is taught to canine nutritionists. They yeah, they will, they'll disparage you, they will make you feel guilty, they will frighten you. Um, not all vets, obviously, not all vets, but a majority. And that's what they're taught to do. So in their training, and you're right, they get very little nutritional training. And what they do get is this new science where you just pull in all of these powdered nutrients. I'm surprised that they aren't, putting them all in a little capsule by now and saying, just give your dog this pill every day. I really think that, pet owners would buy it if it came from vets. Why
I was
not?
going to say it could move in that direction unless we're careful.
Mhm.
One thing you said about, feeding 3 times a day. I mean, is there an optimum of how many times an animal should eat during the day, or again with your rotational monofeeding?
Well, nobody knows what optimal is. Wolves in the wild eat every couple of days on average, and that's, their feeding patterns are very random. And I like randomness too. I use randomness when I feed my own animals a
Oh,
lot. So
okay.
my cat, I feed my cat pretty much every day, but I feed my dog different foods, different times, different amounts. I like people to do that because it allows them to be flexible and watch for symptoms. And when there's a symptom going on, you need to back off on the food. You need to fast. You need to think about mistakes you might be making with the food. That's what gives people independence. That's what allows them to not have to run off to the vet and go, oh, what should I do? What should I do?
Mm.
I haven't, I very rarely go to a vet, and it's because I have independence. That's what I want to teach other people.
Oh, absolutely. Taking responsibility for, not, I mean, that's the kind of core message for our work, is for people to take responsibility of their own health. But this is now applying to their pet health, and that's just as important when, they're caring for animals, to understand what health is, what's going on. It was really, the sort of 3 times a day, is that pushed as, how they should eat, but you wouldn't put out a bowl of food 3 times a day, but you would change it around, at different times. So as you say, just to um, vary it, really.
Randomize it. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for bringing me back to that, because I really do leave that up to the owner. And a
Yeah.
lot of people feed at a specific time every day, and that's totally fine, completely fine. A
Oh,
lot
okay.
of people don't want to feed once a day, they want to feed twice a day. That's totally fine. All they need to do is change what they feed their dogs. They don't really need to worry too much about what time they feed, how many times per day. I won't quibble about that. They can decide that for themselves. It makes people feel comfortable people sometimes will stop what they're doing and go home in order to feed their dog at a certain time. And that's totally fine if that makes them feel comfortable. It's
Mm.
absolutely not necessary, because dogs don't have clocks. They don't have clocks in their stomachs either. They're just conditioned, right?
Neither do we, but yes, I
Conditioned.
mean, you're absolutely right. But so I mean, it's really good for people to hear that it's not a fixed system. It's very flexible,
Mhm.
and it's for them to choose for themselves, as long as they are choosing the right food.
Right.
That's the point,
Yeah,
choosing the right
that's key.
food, and
Mhm.
then how often. But again, they need to be aware of the symptoms, what can happen, just to learn how their dog is behaving. I don't mean in sort of, being a, good animal, but just if there are behavioral changes, so that might be related to, poor health or something, in which case you'd say kind of back off with the food. Am I correct in remembering that you said that the dogs have a good sense of smell, but not necessarily a good sense of taste?
No, they do have taste buds, but they're not as numerous as ours. Their senses are more geared toward smell. They can
Right.
smell meat from great distances. We hardly smell meat at all.
Right.
We smell mostly fruit. I mean, when we come into a room and there's a ripe pineapple or ripe bananas or whatever, we smell that right away. But there can be a steak sitting on the counter, and we don't smell that from across the room, but they would. They would smell it from the next house, maybe. But and they also have very good vision. They are activated when they see moving objects. When we see moving objects, we tend to kind of move away. I see an insect, I'm like, oh, a cat or dog sees an insect, they go, oh, let's go see if
Yes.
that lunch. You know, that's the difference between us and them. And it's inherent. It's in our bodies. You can't deny it. So anyway.
Is there a cat equivalent of parvo or something that has become problematic for kittens when they're first weaned? Not
Yes. Do cats get parvo? God, I haven't even, I'm not sure at this moment if
Oh,
they
okay.
are ever diagnosed with parvo.
Or,
Parvo in
or
cats.
something similar that's given a different name that means that, you know,
Yeah, and it would be the same thing. It
oh
would
yeah,
be misweaned. You know, they're just misweaned onto foods that are going to eventually overwhelm their body's ability to eliminate waste, and then they will shut down and they'll stop eating and they might throw up and have diarrhea and all that. And it looks the same. It is the same. And you know, kittens that are weaned properly onto, you know, the foods that are biologically appropriate for them, that can't possibly happen. And even if it does happen, I mean, I suppose there are situations where there are people who are weaning puppies onto raw meat and weaning kittens probably onto raw meat as well. And it's very rare to find a raw feeder who is as tuned in with the fat issue as they need to be.
right.
And if they are feeding fatty meats, if they're eating commercial, or if they're feeding these commercial raw grinds, they might have the same problem. It would look
Right.
like parvo. They might assume that it's parvo. And especially if they buy into the nonsense that vaccines protect dogs from parvo, if they're not vaccinating against parvo, they might even be more susceptible to the idea that their puppies have parvo or their kittens have parvo.
No.
And then, you know, it's off to the vet or whatever. But
Is there an optimum, no, optimum, wrong word, a recommended age for puppies and kittens to be weaned? I mean, do you think they're being weaned too early because of, you know, the markets in pets, or I mean, I'm just wondering if that would be contributing to the problem, if they're being weaned earlier than they should, so their digestive system hasn't adapted, it isn't ready to take on that kind of solid food.
Oh, that's sort of built in to the biology of the dog, of the mother. And when the mother starts, you know, either running out of milk or rejecting the babies, then they have to be weaned. And it's just a matter of getting them weaned onto the right foods. Now, when it comes to humans, babies are being weaned way too early. And yes, there's an industry that's responsible for that. Humans are being weaned way too early. But when it comes to dogs, it's biological, because you can't force a mother dog to, you know, to nurse a puppy that they're rejecting or whatever, because they know inherently that they're supposed to be weaning their dogs at that, their offspring at that point. They're supposed to be going off, doing their own hunting and bringing it back and regurgitating it for the pups. So at that point, we need to take over and start, you know, feeding the
Right.
dog, because we really can't, feeding the puppies, because we really can't replicate that whole regurgitation process in domestic circumstances.
Oh, yes, I was going to say that. No, I don't think many people would fancy kind of doing that for their puppies. No, I just wondered within the kind of commercial pet market whether they were encouraged to sort of, you know, take the animals away from the mother, take them away rather than let the mother kind of just say it's enough. That was all. If it was just part of that. Again, because it suits the industry to, you know, sell the animals on. I don't know, just within the pet industry, it was just enough.
You know, I don't think there's a specialized industry that specializes in foods that are supposed to be used in the weaning of puppies and kittens. I don't know if such a thing exists. It might, and there might be a little pressure, but I haven't seen that. And it's perfectly safe to start weaning dogs onto their biologically appropriate foods
Oh, yeah, but that's the
when the
problem. They're
mom
not.
starts rejecting them.
Yeah, but the problem is that they're not. They're
They're
being put
not,
into
right?
these products And
Yeah.
again, same with cats. They're put onto these products. I mean, cats have do cats have a similarly good sense of smell and taste?
Yes, even more so. I don't know about the taste buds of cats. I
Okay.
suspect that it's similar, but yeah, they're very tuned into movement and smell, and that's how they have gotten themselves fed over the millennia.
Yes, I mean it's quite amusing. There's a kitten that sometimes, well, I say kitten, I mean it's still obviously a very young cat. Um, I'm not quite sure where it lives, but occasionally comes into my garden, and I saw it this morning, chasing something around, and it was looking, and it just, it's some tiny insect. But as you say, it's the movement, and it was just
Hmm.
chasing that.
That's food for them. Their food moves. Ours doesn't.
Yes, not it doesn't sit in a bowl. So that's interesting. Is there a way of trying to get the food to move for them? But anyway, I suppose there's nothing you can do if in your
Um,
home to put it in the bowl. You don't really want to throw it around the room, do you, to encourage them to
yeah,
chase after it?
that's out of my skill set. I don't
It
really
was just
know about
it was just a thought because of the
how
movement.
I would make it look like it's real, like it's alive.
I think we've covered most things. I mean, one of the things we've so I don't know if you want to kind of just move into heartworm, because that moves into another thing that is supposed to cause
Yeah,
disease, and these
heartworm.
yes, because it's a parasite, so it's not a virus this time. And I think both of us are pretty convinced that parasites are not responsible for any kind of diseased condition, but take take their place in the body when the conditions are bad in the first place. So they won't be there. Well, they might be there, but they don't cause any harm. They're just there to
Right,
feed on the wastes. So
right.
I mean, did you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, the first of all, it starts with a test, or different tests. I mean, they can see the adult actual sort of worms in the blood, and they can actually see those. Or they, for the larval forms, that's where they have these tests, which are either an antigen test and a PCR test. So again, we know they're indirect because antigen tests are non-specific. We know because antibodies are not specific to any disease causing
Right,
agent. So again, we're into the whole problem, but it's very
right.
difficult to really dig in to find out where the original evidence. Well, I've not found it so far. I mean, I haven't spent that long on it yet, to find out where the original evidence that these the filariasis, the Dirophilia immitis. Sorry, anyway, if I've mispronounced that, forgive me. But these little microscopic worms are actually the cause. I've yet to find the original. I won't say it proof, because obviously it isn't, but it's where this came from, and I suspect it's something where they've found something and associated and assumed it's a causal factor, because of course they don't want to look at any other problem. They don't want to look at any kind of anything to do with toxins or waste buildup, or because they don't understand what symptoms are, so they assume symptoms are bad. Look for something and find these things and say, hey presto, that must be the cause. But one of the things that I know you've said that's very interesting is the fact that wild dogs have been found uh, with these so-called
The general term is microfilaria. It's
okay.
just the small larval form of the worm, right, of the parasite.
Yes,
And
and they've been found in healthy dogs. And
right,
my question then is, well, I mean, not to you obviously, because you understand, but if something is supposed to be the cause of a disease, and yet you find that something in a healthy animal, how can it be a causal agent? So I think that for me says there's a big problem with what they call heartworm. Unfortunately, the next phase is really problematic because the animals go to the vet and get put on pharmaceuticals, which are highly
Right.
toxic.
Right.
Interestingly, one of those pharmaceuticals is ivermectin,
Oh, yeah. Right.
or one of the whole range of products. I won't call them medicines, but one of those products. Now, are you aware of any specific kind of symptoms that are supposed to be associated with heartworm? And do you have any knowledge of how changing feeding can remove those symptoms? I mean, is that something you've come across?
No, I've never seen a case of full-fledged infestation of heartworms. It's actually a pretty rare thing, and
Okay.
most of the time it's just the presence of this microfilaria in the bloodstream. And I don't know if it's a direct visual thing that they do with seeing if they actually see that little critter in there, or if they see some indirect marker, like with the PCR test. In that case, it's a crapshoot whether the thing is there or not, as far as I know. But what we have to consider is that microfilaria, if it's in there, it's not destined to become full-blown worms that will then occupy the heart and kill the animal. That's not an assured outcome. It's a possibility if there's sufficient waste in the body to create a banquet for that parasite to eat. It's kind of like yeast. You always have yeast in your body, but if you eat too much of some things, the yeast is going to proliferate and you're going to have problems. Lots of people have adopted dogs that are said to be positive with this heartworm microfilaria, and they just feed properly and they never have a problem. And there have been a few scientific studies. There aren't very many because these are all done on wild animals, right? And we have to rely on those researchers that are willing to go out there and live with them. And it's a very difficult process. It's much more difficult than having everything in a lab that you can look at under a microscope. So there's all kinds of logistical problems, and that's why we don't have a million studies, but we do have a few. And what we learn from those is very instructive, because in one study, over 900 wolves were tested for heartworm, and 16% were found to be positive. Well, these researchers could find absolutely no outward indication that this heartworm microfilaria that was in their bloodstreams was causing any problem. There was no difference in their weight. There was no difference in their overall vitality, in anything. So, we can't ignore that information. We can't let vets, set up this scary little plastic model, which is what they do. They have this model of a plastic model of a dog's heart, and they have a bunch of heartworms that have been, that are obviously have overtaken the whole heart. I've seen pictures of it. I don't know if it's an actual heart or a plastic heart or what. I imagine that they are creating these things out of plastic because the disease is so rare. It might happen more commonly, say, in feral dogs that are living on the outskirts of civilization, and they eat at landfills every day, or if they eat what the bakery throws out in the dumpster every day. If they eat that stuff and they're dogs, and they're as likely to die of heartworm as anything else. But we have to realize that parasites are not here to kill their hosts. They can't kill their hosts because they would then kill themselves. That's a recipe for extinction. What they're there to do is eat our waste, just like yeast do, just like bacteria do, just like all the other, necrophages, all of the little animals, all the little organisms that consume waste with whom we could not survive, or without whom we could not survive.
Absolutely. One of the important points, and I think, sort of may bring this to a close. I mean, it's amazing how quickly time has gone.
I know.
But interestingly, it's actually the MSD manual, which is the Merck manual that I found about heartworm. I mean, it happens so often. The key phrase is most infected dogs are asymptomatic.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it, and that's it.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, it's if they don't have symptoms, they don't have a disease, therefore whatever it is can't be causing a disease.
Yeah, it's
Because
very convenient, self-fulfilling system they have there.
except of course it's the pharmaceutical industry, and oh no, we need to treat, in other words, give them poisons, because the whole thing, which is really back to where we started, the whole thing is about killing the so-called germs using poisons, which obviously are extremely harmful to the health of the animals. And I mean, we haven't gone into detail about vaccines. It includes vaccines.
Yes.
I mean, I think we've only, well, I say we've only touched. I mean, we've covered quite a lot, but I think there's probably quite a lot more that we could talk about.
There
Maybe
is.
the
We could
time.
go on and on. Yes, and the people are being sold vaccines on the same premise that they're being sold these heartworm and flea and tick preventatives, and they're horrible drugs. These flea and tick and heartworm preventatives. The vets will frighten the dog owners and cat owners into using them, and people think that they're doing the conservative, safe thing for their dogs, and it's so harmful. Dogs are getting seizure disorders in record numbers now because of and it's awful, and it's all because of these very toxic poisons that are applied to dogs. And it takes a long time for a dog on proper foods to cleanse from some of those things, because they are finding, there's this new science called pharmacokinetics, where they're finding ways to make medicines stay in the body longer. And so they hang on, and it's very hard to get dogs detoxed from them. And people can give up hope in the meantime. They can just go, oh, well, this isn't working, I got to go do something else. And it's very discouraging, but it's all because of that, the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes, so really it boils down to as far as I mean, I know we've mainly talked about dogs, but I would imagine it applies to cats as well, and probably most other pets. It boils down to two things: correct feeding and avoiding toxins in the form of pharmaceuticals, whether they're pills, potions, preventives, vaccines, so all of that. So if it's again taking responsibility back and providing food from the home, as you say, preparing as much as possible in the home, and as truly natural as possible, in the way of providing what they need to eat, rather than what the vets and the pet food industry tell them that the animals ought to eat. And again, if they switch off the television and don't listen to the adverts. But the other thing is, importantly, is that they come and visit your website, which I will put a link to below. I'll attach to that. So I've got your website. I think that article about parvo is so comprehensive. I think it'd be really useful. I mean, I know it's on the website, but to add a link to that. And also, would your YouTube channel be useful for people to get information from there?
Yes, I do have a YouTube channel called Rotational Monofeeding, but I also have a lot more on my personal YouTube channel, which is just my name, Nora Lenz. And we have a Facebook group for anybody wanting to know about rotational monofeeding, who's just starting from the beginning. They can join our Facebook group called Rotational Monofeeding. And then we also have a subscription group that is that I do a weekly video for. We do live Q&As and discussion groups, and it's very well moderated by myself and a couple of other expert moderators. And so when people need more information, when they really want to delve into this, because it's a huge area, it really opens up all kinds of rabbit holes in people's lives when they start discovering that they've been lied to about what they should be feeding their dogs and the cats and themselves.
Yes,
So
if you could send me the links to all of that, and I'll make sure that they accompany the video to this, because I mean that's really important. Also, your book, well, yes, it's a people can buy your book, so a link to that as well, because that will give them
yes,
information. Obviously, they can contact you for more information through your website again, so that if you can let me have all of those, and I'll make sure I add them. It's, I'm afraid, going to be a little while before this actually gets put up on the website, but that's but I will send you a copy, and obviously you can share this around as well, and try and
okay.
get the information out to people so that they can start understanding how to look after their pets, especially dogs, as you say,
Okay.
understanding that. So, I mean,
Hey, Dawn, are we still recording? Should I
yeah,
give
yeah,
the
yeah.
website name? Yes, we are. So I just wanted to tell people that the book is only found on the website, and the website is called rotationalmonofeeding.com. So you can only get the book one place, and it's on that website. That's all I sell is information. I also do one-on-one consultations.
Okay, that's great. So again, the contact details are on your website. As I say, they will accompany us. But yes, I mean, good that you've mentioned that. So for people listening, they can hear. So
Okay.
rotationalmonofeeding.com, and rotational monofeeding on Facebook and on YouTube. So yes, are you still able to post this kind of information on YouTube and Facebook? Because we know
I've had no problems whatsoever.
that's
No
good.
problems. Yeah, it's
That's
still under their
interesting.
radar.
Have you not explored any other social media platforms yet, or?
Oh, it's just a matter of time. I mean, I devote a lot of my time to the Facebook groups, and we do have an Instagram account as well. I have other people that are handling Instagram, and there's other people who are doing TikTok, and I haven't really posted anything on the other like Rumble or BitChute or any of those. Maybe I should. I haven't really thought about that, but
Well,
yeah,
if
it's worth
you're
thinking
if you're
about.
not having any trouble on YouTube, then that's good, because it
Yeah,
does actually give you access to the widest audience. It's just
right.
because of what's been going on for the last, oh,
Necessity, right.
yeah, the censorship is dreadful. So
Mhm.
just mention the wrong words, and you get videos. I mean, we've had plenty of videos deleted. So we're just using other platforms just because we're not, it's not worth it, because we want the information out there. So I mean, we use Odyssey, so this will go up on our Odyssey channel, but I will
Oh,
send you
really?
a copy.
Okay. Oh, I wonder if you did post this on YouTube, if your name would flag suspicion. I mean,
Yes, well, it's possible, so we'll see. It might put it up on YouTube, but I mean, certainly share it around wherever we can, because this is so, again, it's so important for people to understand. It's not just human health that we need to reevaluate.
right.
It's animal health. I mean, I know we know farm animals, but also pets, and people. A lot of people have pets, and it would be good for them to have some more information about the choices they can make about how they feed them and how they look after them. So this has been
Yes, and
fascinating.
I was just going to say, thanks to your book, there's a whole lot more people out there that are willing to look at the truth about disease, and they're left wondering, what do I do about my animals? Nobody's really talking about how to apply this information to the animals. So It is really important.
It is, and we have had a few people that have said, and what, what about pets? Because we don't specifically talk about pets in the book, but we do talk about animals and the diseases of animals and how there's no evidence that they're caused by germs either. Just a few examples.
Right.
Otherwise, the book would have been twice its size. But again, not, it's just, but obviously if it applies to animals, I mean, we do talk about myxomatosis. That's nothing to do with the virus, of course. So, if it applies to a variety of different animals, then it has to also apply to pets, cats and dogs. So, I mean, I know people have a whole variety of different exotic pets, so that's not really the focus of this. And, but it's the principle really to
Yes.
say, look at what these animals eat in the wild, and
Right.
then take that information into the home to feed them as close to what they would normally eat in the wild as you possibly can. So I mean, this has been
Right.
absolutely brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Nora. I just fascinating. I mean, I suspect we can probably find lots more that we could talk about. So maybe we could do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Absolutely. Anytime. It's been such fun. I love talking about dog and cat health, and especially with somebody that I know gets it, who's open to the truth. It just makes all the difference. It really makes it fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
So
you. It's been
thank you.
brilliant. Thank you. Oops.